Chapter 13. Mercy Me.
I never had a problem facing fear, but I'm done. Over and out, my dear.
How are you feeling? Izuku smiled weakly at his friend. Dark circles lined the underside of his eyes. Another get well card sat upon his bedside table. The inside was blank save for a single name printed with neat precision. I've been better, he replied truthfully. Last night had been rough. The amount of time that Izuku had spent on his phone had done a number on his head. The throbbing and nausea had refused to subside for hours. After a nurse had come by and taken a look at his monitors, he'd been sedated again. Although his sleep had not been restful, he did feel a little more present today. His mood, on the other hand, left much to be desired. Shoto studied Izuku from the chair next to his hospital bed. His brow furrowed as his eyes passed over the various apparatuses that were attached to his friend. That video, he murmured. Izuku grimaced. The news broadcast was the last thing he wanted to talk about and one of the only things he could think about. I'd say it looked worse than it was, but Izuku gestured at the hospital equipment. Shoto didn't smile. Izuku's shoulders sagged. Sorry, he said. Shoto sighed. I think I understand why you would want to shoot a protest, he said. That aside, I'm curious how you heard about it. Izuku fidgeted with his hands. Couldn't I have just stumbled across it, he asked. Midoriya, Shoto said. You've been acting strangely. Izuku hesitated. Had he? I've been trying to push myself further towards photojournalism, he said, his gaze fixated on his hands. That's what I've wanted to do since high school. You know that? I told you about the extra work I've been taking on. You didn't tell me about this. It wasn't exactly a paying job, Izuku admitted. It was more of an opportunity. Kaken was so hesitant to give me the contact and... Kaken. Shoto's eyes widened for a split second before his face returned to its usual impassive mask. That guy from Halloween. He put you up to this. Ka-chan didn't put me up to anything. Izuku protested. I wanted to do this. He wasn't going to tell me about it? But he did. Izuku frowned. This isn't his fault, he said. He could already taste the bitterness of his next words on his tongue. I did this to myself. Shoto seemed to be considering Izuku's words. I can't help but notice that you began pushing your photography in this direction around the same time that this person showed up, he said. He looked at Izuku meaningfully. You've been avoiding the subject for months, but I have to ask you one last time. Did something happen after that party? Well, Izuku stammered, his face reddening. Oh, Shoto said. It's not like that. Izuku cried out, covering his scarlet face with his arms. He peeked at Shoto through the gap. That is. Something happened. But it's not what you think. We didn't. Izuku couldn't even bring himself to finish the sentence. His face was already bordering on purple. We drank some more. We talked for a while. We might have made out a bit, Izuku whimpered in embarrassment. He averted his eyes. Just the one time. We haven't, since. Shoto's silence was deafening. Izuku began to feel horribly judged. He's not that bad. Izuku said defensively. Kaken may be a little rough around the edges, but trust me. He's an amazing person. He bunched his fists up in his lap. He's crazy talented, for starters. He does so much. He paints, we painted together once, and he cooks. It's always way too spicy, but his food is incredible. He let me crash at his place one night so I wouldn't have to sleep at work. He's given me some career advice that's helped me too. He inspires me. I want to push myself as hard as he does. How else am I? Midoriya, Shoto said. You're doing it again. Izuku clamped his mouth shut. He furrowed his brow in confusion. Huh. Shoto inclined his head. Oh. Izuku shifted uncomfortably. This is different, he said. How? Shoto looked at Izuku evenly. He may be a guy, but you're still you. You're doing the same thing you always do. Going after these, artistic types, has never done you any good. They're flighty, they have other goals and they end up hurting you. Izuku bit his lip. What's wrong with having goals, he asked. Kaken is. I'm pretty sure he likes having me around. I'm working on him. Shoto's eyebrow twitched. If you have to convince someone to like you, then you shouldn't be chasing them in the first place, he said tensely. You asked me. You asked me to say this to you after what happened with your last girlfriend. I know, Izuku said. And the one before that. I know. Izuku snapped. He grimaced. His most recent relationship had ended nearly 2 years ago, but her infidelity was still a sore spot. I can't do this, Todoroki. Not right now. Shoto's lips formed a tight line. I worry about you, he said. You have a bad track record with relationships, and this guy, he hung his head. Nobody wants to see you in the hospital, Midoriya. You deserve to be with someone who values you as much as you value them. Shoto's words made Izuku's heart ache. As much as Izuku dreaded hearing from Katsuki, another part of him was upset that the blonde hadn't tried to contact him at all. Kirishima had said that Katsuki had been angry, but then again, when wasn't he? The more that Izuku thought about it, the less those words seemed to mean. Izuku's friend, however, had come to visit him in the hospital, and he'd been rude. Todoroki, Izuku said. He brought a hand to his face. Thank you. I'm sorry for worrying you. I'll think about what you've said. Shoto nodded almost imperceptibly. I'm sorry about your camera, he said. If you like, you can borrow my old Canon. It's nothing fancy, but I hope it's enough to tide you over until you can get a replacement. Izuku was familiar with Shoto's camera. It was a basic model, but still nicer than something the average person would have. Thanks Todoroki, he said gratefully, discreetly rubbing at his eye. That means a lot. Shoto averted his eyes. Please take care of yourself, he murmured. I will, Izuku promised. The sound of Izuku's privacy curtain being drawn back distracted the boys. A nurse poked his head in. I'm sorry to interrupt, he said, looking at Izuku, but Officers Hertz and Chang are here to see you. Shoto raised an eyebrow. Izuku scratched his neck self-consciously. My doctor told me earlier that the police came by yesterday looking for a statement, he explained. I guess they thought I wasn't up to it then. He smiled wryly. I don't know what they think they're going to get out of me. I don't even remember the attack. Shoto's expression became pained. Izuku forced a grin. Don't worry, he said reassuringly. I'm fine. I'm going to be fine. The words felt hollow even to him. Shoto stared Izuku down, then sighed. He stood. I'm sure the officers will want privacy, he said. Thank you, Todoroki, Izuku said apologetically. I'll let you know when I'm home. The nurse parted the curtain for Shoto and saw him out. Izuku sighed. A new feeling of heaviness was left in Shoto's wake. Izuku had known it was possible that Katsuki didn't care much for him, but his friend's words made the thought difficult to ignore. After all, how could he? He hadn't sent Izuku a single message. The days passed by excruciatingly slowly at the hospital. There wasn't a lot to do in the NSICU. Izuku could only use his phone for brief periods of time, and looking at the magazines his mother had gifted him brought on headaches and dizziness. He slept a lot. Blood work became a routine procedure, and he'd had another couple of CT scans. The nurses came by frequently to monitor him, occasionally having him complete more tests. The good news was that the doctors had been able to confirm that the bleeding had stopped. The pain was really starting to set in. Izuku's doctor had tried to incrementally lower his morphine dosage only to bring it back up again when the pain in his head, shoulder, and side became unbearable. He was having some difficulty maneuvering his head, but at one point he'd felt brave and had shifted his hospital gown to examine his torso, almost gagging when he saw the aggressively dark purple and red bruise that was nearly a foot in length and only slightly less in width. He'd covered himself back up and hadn't dared look since. His mother came by every day and stayed for as long as they'd let her. A few of Izuku's friends had also come by. Itza had been a bit much with his stiff demeanor and thorough tongue lashing, but Izuku had appreciated the visit nonetheless. Messages continued to pour in from friends and acquaintances. Shoto had texted him mentioning something about a package that was sitting outside his apartment door. He'd told Izuku that he'd keep it at his place for now. Izuku knew he ought to feel more grateful towards his friends and family, but as the days passed, he only grew gloomier. The NSICU was a depressing place. Izuku watched the same visitors come and go. Some of the other patients had been gifted flowers and cards, but the side table belonging to the man laying a couple of beds over from Izuku remained barren. He hadn't moved once since Izuku had arrived. The nights were long. The news clip kept replaying itself over and over again in Izuku's mind. Izuku had been furious with himself at first, but his self-loathing eventually turned into something far worse. Defeat. Izuku knew that his friends were there to help him. His mother was as well. Shoto had even offered to lend him his camera. But the more that Izuku thought about it, the less he wanted it. Why bother? He'd probably end up destroying it too. Katsuki still hadn't messaged him. Shoto was right. Good morning, sweetie. Izuku heard the sound of a curtain being pulled back. He opened his eyes. Inko was smiling brightly today, her spirits much improved. In her hands was a simple white box. I thought you must be sick of all this hospital food, she said. So I brought us some treats from a little bakery that I stumbled across yesterday. Here, take one. She placed the box gingerly in Izuku's lap. Izuku maneuvered himself carefully until he was sitting upright. He'd found that he could manage small movements so long as he took his time. He opened the box. Izuku was sure the pastries inside should have looked delicious, but the delicate knots and flaky crusts held no appeal whatsoever. Izuku had noticed that it didn't really matter what anyone gave him to eat. Everything was equally unappetizing. Izuku took a sweet bun from the box, if only to please his mother. Thanks, Mom. These look great, he said. Inko beamed. She rifled through her purse and produced a couple of napkins. She passed one to her son, then took the box back and selected a pastry for herself. I thought so too, she said enthusiastically, biting into a mini quiche. Izuku wanted to smile at his mother. He really did. He wondered how much work she was missing because of him. Izuku picked at his pastry half-heartedly while his mother rambled on about her new find. She was interrupted only when the privacy curtain opened and Dr. Nakamura stepped inside. Good morning, Izuku, Dr. Nakamura said. She nodded politely towards Inko. The doctor was carrying her usual chart as well as an additional stack of papers. Inko returned the gesture while Dr. Nakamura took the spare seat next to her. I have some good news, she said. We've finally received the necessary documents from your work. The doctor looked at Inko. You may want to read everything and give Izuku the details verbally. She handed the papers to her. There's a form that he'll need to sign. Based on his current progress and estimated recovery time, I'm recommending a 6-week leave of absence and a gradual return to work. Dr. Nakamura's words only made Izuku want to sink more deeply into the hospital bed. Great. 6 weeks with nothing to do other than think about what a giant disappointment he was. Your wounds are healing well, the doctor continued. Your blood oxygen levels are satisfactory and inflammation has remained manageable. I'd like to keep you here for at least another day, but so long as you remain stable, it wouldn't be unreasonable to expect a discharge late tomorrow. Inko trembled with happiness. Did you hear that, Izuku? She asked. She took her son's hand and squeezed it encouragingly. You might be able to leave tomorrow. Yeah, Izuku said. Terrific. Dr. Nakamura's brow creased. Your leave would of course be conditional, she said, her gaze fixated on Izuku. You'll be on bed rest for a few days, and your mobility will be limited. What's your current living situation? I've got my own place, Izuku replied. It's small, so I can manage. He's coming home with me, Inko interrupted. Her grip on Izuku's hand tightened. Izuku balked. Wait, Mom. Izuku, Inko said. You are not going back to an empty apartment right after leaving intensive care. You have 6 weeks off work. Goodness knows it wouldn't kill you to spend some time with your mother. Izuku opened and closed his mouth. He knew there was no point in arguing with his mother, but he wished he'd been allowed to have a say in the matter. Dr. Nakamura's mouth quirked. I suppose that's settled, she said. I'll leave you two to review the documents. She rose from her chair and turned to go. When she reached the curtain, she paused as if in afterthought. It would probably do you some good to get out of the NSICU for a short while, she said. Things can be a bit grim around here. I'll see if one of our nurses can grab you a wheelchair and roll you around the building later today. That sounds wonderful. Inko beamed. Thank you, Doctor. Dr. Nakamura nodded and bowed out. What a lovely woman, Inko remarked. I guess, Izuku mumbled. Inko patted Izuku's hand. Hang in there, she said softly. You'll be out soon. She picked up the documents and began to look through them. Oh dear, she said. These are quite dense. I think I'll fetch a tea from the hospital cafeteria before we get started. Would you like anything? I'm fine, Izuku replied. He suddenly felt like laughing. I won't be long, Inko said. She set the papers and pastry box on Izuku's bedside table. Izuku watched her go. Eventually he turned his head towards the side table. He debated picking up his phone but quickly abandoned the idea. He doubted there was anything worth seeing on it. Instead he lay back, closed his eyes and let his mind drift. I'm sorry. I'm looking for Midoriya Izuku. An uncertain voice wafted through the NSICU. Right this way. Izuku heard footsteps and the slow draw of a curtain. His eyelids felt heavy, but he opened his eyes anyways. Standing just inside the curtain space was Yurika Okako. Okako was wearing a thick winter coat, a wool skirt and a pair of black leotards. In her arms was a substantial bouquet of white, yellow, and pale blue flowers. Okako shuffled her feet. I'm sorry if I'm intruding, she said. I tried to message you, but you didn't answer. Not that I expected you to. You're injured after all. Izuku wasn't expecting to see his co-worker, but he managed a faint smile. Hi, Okako, he said. There was a time when Izuku might have felt embarrassed to be seen by Okako while wearing nothing but a hospital gown and with a plastic tube up his nose. He slowly worked himself upright. Oh, you don't have to. Okako took a few steps forward then suddenly stopped. A flush rose to her cheeks. She stared at her feet. You shouldn't push yourself, she said quietly. I'm not, Izuku reassured her. I'm healing well. My doctor said I should be able to leave tomorrow. Really? That's great, Okako murmured. She glanced at Izuku's bedside table. These are for you. She presented Izuku with the bouquet before carefully setting it on the overcrowded surface. "They're from everyone at the office. This too." She handed Izuku a card. Izuku accepted the card. "Thank you," he said. Okako was clearly ill at ease. When their eyes met, Izuku tried his best to give her a genuine smile. Instead of returning the smile, however, Okako's face puckered and her lower lip quivered. "Oh, Izuku," she whimpered. She placed her hand over his. "What did they do to you?" Izuku startled. Before he had a chance to gather his thoughts, Inko reappeared. "I'm back, Izuku." Inko stopped, her tea sloshing. Her lips parted in surprise. "Oh," she said, a smile forming at the corners of her mouth. "I'm sorry, I didn't realize I was intruding. I'll wait." Okako jerked her hand away from Izuku and leapt backwards. No, it's okay," she stammered. "I was just. Ah. You must be Izuku's mother." She bowed forcefully. "I'm Uraraka Okako. I'm a FFF friend." Inko pressed her lips together. "It's so nice to finally meet you," she said, returning the bow. "Izuku's told me quite a bit about you." Izuku watched in horror as Okako's face proceeded to turn scarlet. "Ha, has he?" she squeaked. Inko nodded enthusiastically. The worst part of it all was that Inko was being honest. The fact that Izuku hadn't brought Okako up recently, however, seemed to be lost on his mother. "Please have a seat," Inko urged. Okako hesitantly obliged, her face still red. Inko hurriedly retrieved the pastry box. "I brought some treats this morning from the cutest little bakery. Would you like one?" she asked. She opened the box and held it in front of Okako. "Oh, I couldn't possibly," Okako started. "Please do." Inko pressed. "I bought far too many for the two of us." "Well. Thank you," Okako conceded. She selected a tart. Izuku had no idea what was going on, but he was becoming more uncomfortable by the second. "I have to say, you look awfully familiar," Inko remarked. "Were you by any chance that model who Izuku posted all those lovely photos of?" "Oh, I'm not a model." Okako waved a flustered hand. "I just work in editorial." "Really?" Inko asked, her eyes sparkling. "But you're so pretty." Okako quivered. She seemed to be resisting the urge to bury her face in her hands. "Thank you," she replied self-consciously. She shyly slid her eyes towards Izuku. "Izuku did a wonderful job. He's an amazing photographer." Her face suddenly lit up. "That reminds me." She smiled. "A couple of my girlfriends saw your photographs. They loved them and wanted to know if you were taking clients. Once you're feeling better, that is." "Great," Izuku thought. "More fashion." "I don't know," he said. "I'm kind of out of camera right now." Okako winced. "I thought you might want to use the studio again," she trailed off, shaking her head. "What that girl did to your camera was horrible. I couldn't watch the whole video. It was too awful." "I can't believe they played that on the evening news," Inko said, her face paling. "I fainted 3 times." Izuku grimaced. Don't think about that," he said. Okako patted Inko's hand sympathetically. "You must have been so worried," she said. She looked at Izuku. I was worried too. You ought to be more careful with yourself." "My Izuku has always been like this," Inko lamented. "He gets caught up in his ideas and he forgets himself." Okako glanced at Inko and set her jaw. She regarded Izuku with a stern expression. "Do you really need to be photographing protests?" she asked. "There are plenty of other opportunities out there. I remember you told me a few months back that your boss was reluctant to let you transfer. If you like, I could put in a good word for you." She reddened. If you were photographing events, we'd be working closer together. Inko beamed, clearly thrilled. What a marvelous idea, she said. Izuku looked between his mother and Okako. Okako's face was flushed prettily. He remembered the way that she had touched his hand earlier. Her feelings were becoming more and more apparent. Guilt seeped into Izuku's belly. He couldn't let this go on. His mother would leave the curtained space if she was asked. Izuku was sure of it. Izuku twisted himself towards Okako so that he could face her properly. Ocha-ko. A sharp pain stabbed Izuku in the ribs, followed by a sudden bout of intense nausea. Izuku's eyes widened. He clapped a hand over his mouth. For a split second he was convinced that he was going to throw up right then and there. "Oh dear," Inko said. She sprung to her feet and gently guided Izuku back to his former position. "I'm sorry," she said, glancing at Okako from over her shoulder. "I'm afraid this may have been a little too much for him." Okako flashed Izuku a concerned look. "I should probably get going." She stood up. "It was lovely meeting you," Inko said, clasping Okako's hand between her own. Okako smiled. "I'm glad we met as well." She glanced at Izuku. "I hope you feel better soon," she said. "Let me know if you need anything. I'm happy to help however I can." Everything was happening far too quickly for Izuku. He needed to talk to Okako, but the turbulent wave of nausea roiling in his stomach had other ideas. The most Izuku could manage was a stiff nod. "Thanks," he croaked. Inko saw Okako out, then turned back to her son. "What a sweet girl," she chirped. She winked. "I can see why you like her." Liked, Izuku thought. He closed his eyes and tried to focus on his breathing rather than the heavy coil of remorse settling into his chest. "Okay, Izuku," Dr. Nakamura said. "You're all set." Izuku shifted restlessly in the hospital wheelchair. "I can walk out by myself, you know," he said with a hint of reproach. "It's best not to overexert yourself," Dr. Nakamura replied. "Please remember that you are on bed rest for the next few days. We'll see you in 6 days to remove your staples and to evaluate your progress. Should you notice any changes in your health in the meantime, go straight to the nearest hospital emergency room." "Thank you so much, Doctor," Inko said, tearing up. "I don't know what we would have done without you." "Not at all," Dr. Nakamura replied. Her gaze fell on Izuku. "Take care of yourself," she said. If Izuku had to hear one more person say that to him, he was going to scream. Inko went on ahead to fetch her car while a nurse wheeled Izuku down to the outpatient lobby. The cold evening air that wafted through the sliding doors every now and then was a refreshing change from the stale hospital atmosphere. A shiver traveled along the bare patch on Izuku's head where he'd been stapled. Inko's car pulled around. The nurse rolled Izuku out to meet her. He opened the car door and helped Izuku inside. Izuku had walked a couple of short distances under close supervision earlier that day. However, he was still unnerved by how gelatinous his legs felt after spending the better part of a week bedridden. Once he was off bed rest, he'd have to work hard to get his strength back. The nurse bid them farewell and closed the car door. Izuku fumbled himself into a seat belt. His coordination was improving, but it still wasn't great. Dr. Nakamura had told him that it would be a few weeks before he was fully mobile again. Izuku was silent as Inko drove them over to his apartment. The sun had already set, but the light from passing street lamps was uncomfortably bright. After a few minutes, Izuku closed his eyes. Inko seemed to sense his discomfort and let him be. It wasn't long before they pulled into Izuku's complex. Getting out of the car proved a feat in its own right. Izuku could feel his ribs and shoulder protesting as he stood. He wasn't entirely able to hide his grimace. Inko insisted that Izuku hold onto her arm as they made their way inside. Izuku didn't see how it would help, but he humored her anyways. He'd just have to be careful not to trip so that he didn't end up taking them both down. When they finally entered Izuku's apartment, it didn't take long for Izuku to notice that the bed was made, that several articles of women's clothing were folded and stacked neatly on his desk, and that the kitchen was immaculate. "Mom," Izuku said. "Have you been staying here?" Inko flushed. "I hope you don't mind," she said. "Your apartment is so much closer to the hospital. It saved me a lot of driving." "Oh, but your kitchen." "Izuku, it's like I never taught you how to clean in the first place." Izuku's stomach sank. Great. He'd forced his mother to stay in his tiny bachelor apartment instead of in her home outside city limits. He sighed, trudging over to the closet. He began to pull a shirt from it. He'd need a few changes of clothes if he was going to spend time at his mother's. "Izuku," Inko admonished. She charged over to her son and yanked the shirt from his hands. She pointed to Izuku's bed. "Sit," she commanded. "Your doctor said that you shouldn't be moving around much." She set the shirt aside, grabbed her son's hand and led him over to the bed. She smiled. "You can order me around from here if you like." Izuku groaned inwardly. Was he allowed to do anything for himself? Izuku understood that he was injured, but having that fact slapped in his face over and over again was almost unbearable. Concern crept into Inko's features. "Sweetie, are you okay?" she asked. She placed a hand on Izuku's forehead. "You don't feel hot," she said. "Are you dizzy? Do you feel nauseous?" "Dude, I'm fine," Izuku muttered. "Let's just pack." As Izuku directed his mother around the apartment, he vaguely recalled that Shoto had texted him a few days ago about a package. The sudden urge to get away from his mother for a couple of minutes was overwhelming. "Sorry Mom," Izuku said, rising stiffly. "I just remembered that I told Todoroki that I'd let him know when I was out of the hospital." "Oh," Inko said. "I'll come with you." "That's okay," Izuku replied. "I'll just be a minute." Inko made a protesting noise. "Mom," Izuku said exasperatedly. "Todoroki lives 2 doors down from me. I'll be fine." After a few more reassurances, Izuku managed to extricate himself from his mother. He hobbled down the hallway and knocked quietly on his friend's door. The door opened to reveal a young woman with voluminous black hair. "Izuku," she exclaimed happily. "You're back. I'm so glad." She stepped closer and gave him a gentle hug. "Shoto will be pleased to see you. Would you like to come in? I've just made tea." "Thanks, Momo," Izuku said. "I'll have to pass this time. My mother is already unhappy about me being here without her." "Is she staying with you?" Momo asked, glancing down the hallway. "She tsked. Poor thing. She must have been worried sick. Just a moment. I'll fetch Shoto." Momo left the door open. Within seconds Shoto emerged. His face was as impassive as always, but Izuku could sense a palpable relief about him. "Midoriya," Shoto said. "You're back." "Sort of," Izuku replied. "My mother is insisting that I go home with her. I'm just here to pick up a few things." Shoto nodded. "Your package," he said. He disappeared and returned moments later with a brown parcel between his hands. He gave it to Izuku. "It was sitting outside your apartment door. I thought I'd pick it up before someone else did." Izuku turned the package over in his hands. It was roughly cube-shaped and approximately a foot in width. It must have arrived while his mother was at the hospital. Izuku looked at the return address curiously. "Any idea what it is?" he asked. Shoto raised his brow. "You don't know?" Izuku frowned. "I don't remember ordering anything," he said. He thought for a moment. "Maybe I did something odd while I was in the Ensaku. I was kind of out of it the first couple of days." I'll check my credit account before opening it just in case. Good idea, Shoto said. I'm glad to hear that your head is functioning again. Izuku gave Shoto a look. Was that improper? Shoto asked. Forget it, Izuku muttered. It's nothing. Thanks for the package. Shoto hesitated. Let me know when you're home, he said. Momo feels badly that she wasn't able to visit you in the hospital. She wants to cook you dinner. Izuku wanted to feel happy. He really did. She really doesn't have to, but I appreciate the offer, he said. I wouldn't mind a visit. I'm going to be off work for a while and I'll need a few distractions. Shoto nodded. We'll see you soon. Izuku rearranged his face into the shape of a smile. Yeah. When Izuku returned to his apartment, he gave the package to his mother, then forgot about it completely. I can't get over how lovely Okako was, Inko gushed as they passed the city limits. It was so sweet of her to come and visit you. The flowers were beautiful. The flowers were from everyone, Izuku mumbled. His eyes were closed and his seat was reclined. I'm sure she picked them out, Inko said. We'll set them somewhere nice once we get home. Maybe we'll put them on the kitchen table. Would you prefer to have them in your bedroom? The kitchen table is fine, Izuku replied. He wished his mother would stop talking about Okako. Inko hummed happily. Such a sensible girl. She's the one who you took to that show a couple of months back, wasn't she? I saw the photo that you posted online. She posted it, Izuku corrected. Well, it was a lovely photo, Inko said. You'd certainly make an attractive couple. Mom, Izuku complained. Inko chuckled. Am I embarrassing you? She asked teasingly. I'm sorry. I won't say another word. Izuku cracked an eye. It's not like that. Of course not. Inko pressed her lips together. The corners of her mouth twitched. Izuku didn't like the look on his mother's face, but denying his interest further wouldn't help his case. Izuku had almost come out to his mother a few times since college. They had always been close, especially since she had raised him as a single mother. He already shared so much of his life with her. Every time he'd tried to approach the subject, however, he'd ended up putting it off. He'd never had any pressing need to tell her, after all. Izuku had never openly pursued another man before. Izuku was suddenly tempted to tell his mother everything. He wanted to confide in her, to admit to his bisexuality, and to talk to her about Katsuki. It would be such a relief. Another part of him said that the timing was bad. His mother was already worried about him. Why cause her further stress? He'd just suffered a major head injury. There was no guarantee she'd take him seriously. Besides, he and Katsuki weren't dating. Katsuki, in all likelihood, wasn't even interested in him. Kirishima had messaged Izuku 5 days ago. Izuku would have preferred shouting over radio silence. Izuku balled his hands into fists. Why was trying so hard to get closer to Katsuki? Shoto was right. Izuku had a tendency to pursue ambitious people, and it had only ever gotten him hurt. What was Izuku doing with his life? Why was he chasing after a guy who didn't give half a damn about him? Why was he pursuing his dreams when they only caused his loved ones pain? He'd upset his mother. He'd worried his friends. He'd worried Okako. Did these people matter less than his selfish ambitions? He should give it up. No one wanted him to be a photojournalist anyways. Izuku could learn to be happy at his current job. Okako had offered to help him switch departments. With any luck, he'd be able to photograph headshots for interviews and local events for articles. Even the Beat had to do the odd political piece now and then. Okako was trying to help him. Okako had visited him in the hospital. Okako cared about him. Izuku had liked her at one point. He could learn to like her again. His mother would be happy. Izuku would have a stable job. His life would be easier. He wouldn't have to put himself into dangerous situations. He wouldn't have to deal with the costs of losing his equipment. He didn't need that kind of thrill. He could avoid the heartache. He didn't have to help others. It wasn't his responsibility to change the world. He could live peacefully without ever making a ripple, without standing accomplished in his field, without realizing his aspirations. Izuku. Izuku opened his eyes. Huh. Inko's brow was creased. What's wrong? She asked. Izuku frowned. It was then that he realized that his eyes were bleary. He raised a hand and touched his cheek. It was wet. Oh, he said. Inko's gaze softened. My poor baby, she said. She reached over and squeezed Izuku's knee. You've had such a rough week. Don't you worry. Mama's going to take good care of you. We'll have a nice, calm time together. You'll see. For some reason, Inko's words caused a fresh wave of tears to spill down Izuku's face. He closed his eyes and willed the world to disappear. When they finally arrived at their modest single-level home in the neighboring town, Izuku had every intention of hobbling to his childhood bedroom and sleeping through the next few days. Inko adamantly refused to let Izuku carry anything inside, so instead he sat at the tiny kitchen table and pressed his palms into his eyes. He'd become used to lying stationary and the last few hours had been a lot for him. Inko joined Izuku not long after. She nodded understandingly when he excused himself to go to his bedroom. Izuku closed his bedroom door and sat down gingerly on his old bed. It creaked beneath his adult weight. He breathed deeply, taking solace in the peace and quiet. It was the first time he'd been alone in days. Izuku lowered himself onto his back, wincing when his body protested. He stared up at the ceiling. In his younger years, Izuku had lain on his bed and envisioned his favorite comic book heroes fighting battles that he'd orchestrated. In his adolescence, he'd seen his hopes and dreams for the future dancing promisingly before him. Tonight he only saw white stucco. Izuku closed his eyes but reopened them seconds later. He felt restless. He really ought to change into pajamas before going to bed. He slowly lowered himself onto the floor where his mother had left his overnight bag and unzipped it. The first thing that Izuku saw was the mysterious package. It took him a moment to remember that he'd given it to his mother back at the apartment. Izuku pulled the parcel from the bag and brought it close to his face. Studying it proved fruitless, its outward appearance held no clues. Izuku sighed. He really had ordered something while he was in the hospital, hadn't he? He grabbed his phone and signed into his credit account. He'd need to return the item as soon as possible if he wanted to get his money back. He changed the screen's brightness to its lowest setting, then began scrolling through his latest transactions. Nothing seemed out of place. Izuku didn't spot any unusual purchases or items that he couldn't account for. The next logical conclusion was that someone had sent him the package. Izuku shook the box gently. There was a heavy rustling. It sounded like a sizable object. Izuku crawled over to his old desk and grabbed a pen. He set the package down in front of him and got to work. Izuku pried the thick tape from the box using a combination of the pen and his fingers. He extracted a smaller package, removed the bubble wrap and proceeded to have a heart attack. Izuku's hands trembled. Was he dreaming? The lettering on the packaging was clear and concise. Nikon D810. Izuku knew the camera well. It was several models nicer than his last. It was also far more expensive than anything he could afford. Izuku stared at the box, stupefied, then began to panic. Izuku picked up his phone and rechecked his accounts. He must have missed something in his initial search. When nothing came up, he grew frustrated. If he hadn't bought the camera, Who had? Izuku scrambled to his feet, gasping when his ribs throbbed painfully. Izuku burst into the kitchen. Mom! Inko's head jerked up. Her tea sloshed onto the table. Izuku! Honey! What's wrong? She stammered. Izuku gestured wildly between the package under his arm, himself, and her. What? Did you? How? He spoke haltingly, unable to form coherent thoughts. Inko's eyes followed Izuku's spastic gestures. It is that a new camera, she squeaked. It was. The package. The package. Izuku cried out, desperately trying to make sense. What package? Inko asked. The one that your friend gave to you. Her eyes widened. Don't tell me that he bought you a new camera. Izuku's brain short-circuited. Ugh. It wasn't you. What? Izuku. Sweetie, those cameras are really expensive. I know. Izuku wanted to tear his hair out. He turned on his heel. Izuku, slow down. Inko called after him. You're supposed to be on bed rest. Rest. Izuku had no time to rest. He had a mystery to solve and a camera to return. It went without saying that he couldn't accept a gift of this size from any of his friends. It wasn't right. 1 hour and countless messages later, Izuku had come to an impasse. He lay on his bed and racked his brain. Shoto hadn't sent the camera. Neither had Itza or any of his other friends. Izuku stared at the All Might poster that beamed at him from the opposite side of the room. Was this a random act of kindness? He'd been in the news, after all. No. The person who sent it had to have known Izuku's address. Izuku began to list everyone who'd ever visited his apartment on his fingers. No one new came up except for. No. It wasn't possible. The thought was ridiculous. Still, Izuku picked up his phone. He was running out of possibilities, and he needed to remove Katsuki from his list of suspects. Feeling like a total idiot, Izuku messaged Katsuki. Someone sent me a package in the mail. Izuku didn't bother to elaborate. Katsuki wouldn't respond. Izuku's screen lit up. So what? Izuku's mouth dried. Why now? Izuku wrote back frantically. It was a new camera. A Nikon. Same brand as my last one. Izuku waited a couple of minutes. He received no response. Izuku bit his lip. What could he say that would get Katsuki's attention? He tried one last time. It's not a very good one. I think he'll return it. Katsuki's response was instantaneous. What the F do you mean it's not a very good one? That camera is 8,000 times better than that piece of you were carrying around. Who the hell do you think you are? Izuku bolted upright. His head spun. He felt winded. Izuku forced himself to send a response with trembling fingers and his heart in his mouth. Oh my god, Ka-chan. It was really you. Ka-chan, I can't accept this. It's too much. Katsuki plowed over Izuku's messages. FUDEKU, did I say you had a effing choice? It's your own goddamn fault for not having a backup. I swear to God you are effing useless. You better not try to return it, UF. Izuku's phone quickly became inundated with messages. Izuku's heart raced as he struggled to keep up with Katsuki's unrelenting pace. Katsuki had never texted him like this before. Izuku's eyes began to blur. Why now? Why, after all this time? Tears spilled down Izuku's face. Katsuki had bought him a new camera. The messages became difficult to read. Effing DEKU. Didn't tell. Protest so you could go. Yourself killed. What the F thinking? Your camera now. Take it. Not destroy. Again. Ain't buying you. New skull. You said. Handle it. Effing said. Deku. Izuku swiped at his soaked face, his breaths coming in ragged gasps. He had thought that no one supported his goals, but he'd forgotten about someone. Katsuki had never once laughed at Izuku or ridiculed his ambitions. He'd criticized Izuku's naivete, sure, but he'd always taken his career aspirations seriously. He'd consistently approached Izuku from a place of experience, offering advice even when it was unsolicited. When everyone else tried to steer Izuku away from photojournalism, Katsuki bought him a new camera so that he could continue to pursue his dreams. Katsuki, who was presently screaming at him for getting himself injured in the first place. More tears poured down Izuku's cheeks. Katsuki cared about him a whole lot more than he'd been letting on. The words that Katsuki was yelling were more valuable to Izuku than any camera would ever be. They rekindled the dampened fire that dwelled within him. They made Izuku want to keep trying. They made him feel like he could pick himself back up again. That maybe, just maybe, everything would be alright. Izuku was exhausted. He was terrified. He was reborn. Katsuki could break him in half and put him back together again 1,000 times over, and Izuku would love every moment of it. He'd love Katsuki every moment of it. His crying began to take on a hysterical quality. He would never be able to repay Katsuki. Izuku looked at his hand and realized that he had dropped his phone. He picked it up again. Katsuki was still messaging him. Izuku tried to read the wall of text that he had missed, but his eyes wouldn't focus. His head began to ache. Ka-cha-hnn, I can't read all of this. My head needs a break, dizzy. Katsuki's messages did not cease, but he did switch topics. Effing lie down. Idiot. Get off. Phone. Stop messaging me. Take care. Idiot. Idiot. Izuku let his phone fall from his hand and onto the bed. It was all far too much for him. After taking a couple of breaths, Izuku shakily picked up his new camera. The sight of the Nikon tucked safely inside of its box only made Izuku cry harder. He took the camera out of its packaging and held it in his hands. It gleamed, shiny and unused. Izuku would guard this camera with his life. Izuku carefully put his camera away. He brought his knees up under his chin and wrapped his arms around his head. He succumbed. Izuku thought about everything that had happened over the past week and all that Katsuki was and meant to him as he sobbed uncontrollably into his arms.